Wren had stopped hoping for her wolf on her 15th birthday. That was the day the pack healer had finally declared what everyone already suspected: no wolf, no shift, no future. She was 22 now, and in the 7 years since that pronouncement, she had learned to live with the pitying glances, the cruel whispers, and the bone-deep loneliness of being the only wolfless woman in a kingdom of shifters. Fetch more wine for the high table, Wren. Her stepmother's voice cut through the noise of the great hall like a blade. And try not to embarrass us in front of His Majesty. His Majesty. Alpha King Kieran Blackwood, the Shadow Wolf himself, had arrived at Thornfield Manor 3 hours ago with a retinue of warriors and advisors. No one knew why. A king didn't visit minor noble houses without reason. But Wren's stepmother had been in a frenzy of preparation for weeks, convinced this was her chance to marry off one of her daughters to royalty. Wren, of course, was not considered a daughter. She was the remnant of her father's first marriage, tolerated only because throwing her out entirely would cause gossip. She slept in the servants' quarters, wore cast-off dresses, and performed whatever menial tasks her stepmother assigned. It was a small life, a quiet life, the only life she would ever have. She gathered the wine pitcher and wove through the crowded hall toward the high table. The feast was in full swing, nobles laughing and drinking and showing off for the king. Wren kept her eyes down, making herself as invisible as possible. She had learned long ago that invisibility was the safest place to be. Absolutely tragic, really, her stepsister Margot was saying as Wren approached. The poor thing never developed a wolf at all. Father was devastated before he died. Can you imagine? A daughter with no wolf? It's like having a child born without a soul. Wren's hands tightened on the pitcher. She knew Margot was talking about her, making sure the king knew exactly how defective the household's unwanted daughter was. A wolf is not a soul. The voice was deep and quiet, but it carried an authority that silenced the entire table. It's a gift, and gifts come in their own time. Wren's gaze lifted involuntarily. Alpha King Kieran Blackwood was not what she had expected. The stories painted him as a monster, a ruthless warrior who had united the 5 provinces through blood and conquest, whose wolf was so massive and dark that soldiers called him the Shadow. But the man at the high table looked almost ordinary. Dark hair, slightly too long, falling across a forehead creased with thought, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and deep and focused directly on her. On her. Wren froze. The wine pitcher trembled in her hands. "You must be the one they're discussing," the king said. His voice was mild, but something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. "The girl with no wolf." Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't interrupt. You were summoned to pour wine and you're doing your job." He held out his goblet, and she stepped forward on unsteady legs to fill it. "What's your name?" "Wren, Your Majesty." "Wren." He said it slowly, like he was testing the shape of it. "A small bird, fragile, easily overlooked." His head tilted. "Is that how you see yourself?" No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever looked at her long enough to wonder. "It's just a name, Your Majesty." Names have power. He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving her face. "And I think there's more to you than anyone here realizes, including yourself." Something stirred in Wren's chest. A flutter. A warmth. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it. The sensation was so foreign, so unexpected that her mind couldn't process it. Then the warmth became heat. The flutter became a roar. Pain exploded through her body. Wren dropped the wine pitcher. It shattered on the stone floor, red liquid spreading like blood, but she barely noticed. Her bones were shifting, cracking, reforming in ways they had never moved before. Her skin burned. her vision blurred. Somewhere far away, she heard screaming. Her own voice, she realized, torn from her throat by agony she couldn't control. "Everyone back!" The king's voice cut through the chaos. "Give her space! Now!" Wren collapsed to her hands and knees. Fur rippled across her arms, pure white, gleaming like fresh snow. Her fingers curved into claws, her spine arched, her jaw lengthened, and for the first time in her 22 years of life, Wren felt her wolf rise. It was not the weak, stunted thing everyone had assumed was missing. It was enormous. It was radiant. It was power beyond anything she had ever imagined. When the shift completed, a massive white wolf stood in the great hall of Thornfield Manor. The nobles had fled to the walls, their faces masks of terror and disbelief. Margot had fainted. Wren's stepmother looked like she might be sick. Only the king remained where he was, standing before her without a trace of fear. "There you are," he said softly, his storm-gray eyes filled with something that looked almost like wonder. "I knew you were in there somewhere." Wren's wolf lifted its head and howled, and the kingdom would never see her the same way again. Shifting back was harder than shifting out. Wren's wolf didn't want to let go. It had been caged for 22 years, trapped in some deep corner of her soul, and now that it was finally free, it fought against returning to human form with every fiber of its being. She could feel its joy, its wild exhilaration, its desperate hunger to run and hunt and howl until the mountains shook. But she could also feel the terror of the nobles pressed against the walls, could smell their fear, sharp and acrid, could hear her stepmother's ragged breathing and Margot's whimpering as she regained consciousness. They were afraid of her, after years of mocking her, pitying her, treating her like something broken and worthless. Now they were afraid. The irony might have been funny if Wren wasn't so overwhelmed. "Easy." The king's voice cut through her panic like a blade through silk. He had moved closer, close enough that she could smell him. Pine and wood smoke and something darker, wilder, that made her wolf's ears prick with interest. "Don't fight it. Let the shift happen naturally. Your wolf has been asleep for a long time. She needs to trust that you'll let her out again." Wren didn't know how he knew to say that, didn't know how he knew anything about what she was experiencing. But his voice was calm and steady, and she found herself focusing on it like a lifeline. Slowly, painfully, her bones began to reform. Fur receded, claws shortened back into fingers. When it was finally over, she was kneeling on the stone floor in a ruined dress, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Someone draped a cloak around her shoulders. The king, she realized, recognizing his scent before she saw his face. He had removed his own cloak and wrapped it around her without hesitation. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." Her voice came out raw, scraped thin by the screaming. I don't understand what happened." "Your wolf awakened. It happens sometimes with late shifters, though I've never seen one quite this late." He offered his hand. "Or quite this powerful." She stared at his hand like it might bite her. Kings didn't help servant girls off the floor. Kings didn't wrap their cloaks around nobodies with ruined dresses and shattered wine pitchers. "Take it," he said, a hint of amusement softening his stern features. "I promise I don't bite. Much." Wren took his hand. His grip was warm and strong, and when he pulled her to her feet, she felt that flutter in her chest again, the same sensation that had preceded the shift. Her wolf stirred, pressing against her consciousness with something that felt almost like recognition. "She needs to be examined by the royal healers," the king announced, addressing the room at large. "I'll be taking her to the capital immediately." "Your Majesty." Her stepmother had finally found her voice, though it trembled audibly. "Surely that's not necessary. She's only... She's a late-blooming shifter with an extraordinarily powerful wolf that's been dormant for over 2 decades." Kieran's tone brooked no argument. "That doesn't happen by accident. Someone, or something, suppressed her shift. I intend to find out what." "Suppressed." The word echoed in Wren's mind. Someone had done this to her? Someone had stolen her wolf, her birthright, her chance at a normal life? I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. The king's gray eyes were unexpectedly gentle. But someone did. And given the circumstances, I think it's best if you're under my protection until we understand what we're dealing with. Your protection? Margot had recovered enough to look outraged. She's a servant. You can't possibly. I can do whatever I like. I'm the king. Kieran didn't even glance at her. Lady Wren will be my guest at the palace. Her belongings will be sent for, assuming she has any worth sending. Lady Wren. The title felt foreign, wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes. But the king said it like it was obvious, like she had always been a lady, and the rest of the world had simply failed to notice. I don't have much, Wren admitted. Just a few dresses, some books. Then we'll travel light. He offered his arm. Can you walk? She should refuse, should insist on staying, on maintaining the quiet, invisible life she had built for herself. But her wolf was pacing eagerly in her chest, and the king was looking at her like she mattered, and for the first time in 7 years, Wren felt something that might have been hope. Yes, she said, taking his arm. I can walk. He led her out of the great hall, past the staring nobles and her stunned stepfamily, into the cool night air where his retinue waited with horses and torches. She didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. The journey to the capital took 3 days. Wren spent most of it in a daze, overwhelmed by everything that had changed. She rode in a covered carriage, a luxury she had never experienced, while the king's warriors flanked her on horseback. Kieran himself rode at the head of the column, though he stopped to check on her every few hours, his gray eyes searching her face for signs of distress. Her wolf, meanwhile, was learning how to exist. It was strange, having a presence in her mind that hadn't been there before. The wolf was curious about everything: the rustle of wind through the trees, the scent of rain on the horizon, the distant call of birds she had never noticed before. Sometimes it pressed forward, eager to shift again, and Wren had to gently push it back. She wasn't ready. Not yet. On the second night, they made camp in a forest clearing. Wren sat by the fire, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, watching the flames dance and trying to process the impossible reality of her new life. You're thinking too loudly. Kieran's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him approaching with 2 cups of something steaming. Tea. It helps with the adjustment. She accepted the cup gratefully. How do you know so much about late shifts? I've seen a few. He settled onto the log beside her, closer than propriety demanded, but not close enough to be improper. My younger brother was a late bloomer. Didn't shift until he was 17. We thought he might be wolfless too. What happened to him? Something flickered across Kieran's face. Grief, quickly suppressed. He died 3 years ago. Border skirmish with the eastern clans. I'm sorry. So am I. He stared into the fire, and for a moment the shadow wolf looked unbearably human. He was the best of us, kind where I was cold, gentle where I was hard. Our mother used to say he got all the warmth and I got all the wolves. Wren didn't know what to say. She had imagined the king as untouchable, invincible, carved from the same stone as his reputation. But the man beside her was grieving a brother, missing a piece of himself that could never be replaced. My mother died when I was born, she offered quietly. My father never really recovered. He remarried for duty, not love. And when he died 5 years ago, his wife made it clear I was no longer welcome in my own home. Yet you stayed. Where else would I go? A wolfless woman with no money and no connections. She laughed bitterly. I was trapped. I told myself I was surviving, but really I was just existing, waiting for something I didn't even believe would come. And now it's here. Kieran turned to look at her, and the firelight made his gray eyes glow almost silver. Your wolf is extraordinary, Wren. I've never seen one so bright. White wolves are rare, sacred in the old stories. They were said to be blessed by the moon goddess herself. Heat crept up her cheeks. I don't feel blessed. I feel terrified. That's normal. He reached out and very gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch sent sparks dancing down her spine. The first shift is always overwhelming, but it gets easier, and you won't have to figure it out alone. Her wolf stirred at his nearness, pressing toward him with an eagerness that made Wren's breath catch. There was something about this man, something that called to her in ways she didn't understand. When he had touched her in the great hall, her wolf had awakened. When he spoke to her now, it practically purred. Why are you being so kind to me? She whispered. You're the king. You could have left me there. You didn't have to take responsibility for any of this. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. When I walked into that hall and saw you, before I knew about your wolf, before any of it, something in me recognized something in you. He held her gaze, unflinching. My wolf has been restless for years, searching for something I couldn't name. And the moment I looked at you, it went still, like it had finally found what it was looking for. Wren's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what he was describing. Every shifter knew the stories, the legends of true mates, souls bound together by fate itself. That's not possible, she breathed. I didn't even have a wolf. You had one. It was just sleeping. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers like they belonged there. And I think maybe it was waiting. For me. The fire crackled, the stars wheeled overhead, and Wren, who had spent her whole life feeling broken and incomplete, wondered if perhaps she had simply been waiting too. For him. For this. For everything that was about to begin. The palace at Shadowmere was a fortress of black stone and silver spires. It rose from the mountainside like something grown rather than built, all sharp angles and towering walls and windows that glinted like watching eyes. Wren stared at it through the carriage window and felt her wolf stir with unease. This was the seat of power for the entire kingdom. And somehow, impossibly, she was being welcomed as a guest. Her chambers were in the east wing, overlooking a garden of night-blooming flowers that filled the air with sweetness after dark. The rooms were larger than the entire servants' quarters at Thornfield Manor, furnished with velvet and silk and more candles than she could count. A personal attendant named Della was assigned to her, a cheerful young woman who seemed genuinely delighted to help Wren navigate her new life. The king has ordered a full wardrobe for you, Della announced on the first morning, throwing open an armoire stuffed with gowns in every color imaginable. He said to spare no expense. Also, the royal healer will see you after breakfast, and His Majesty requests your presence in the library this afternoon. Wren's head spun. This is too much. I can't possibly accept. You can, and you will. Della's smile was knowing. The king doesn't do anything by halves, my lady. If he's decided to take you under his wing, you might as well get comfortable. The healer's examination was thorough and unsettling. He was an ancient wolf named Aldous, with white hair and sharp eyes that seemed to look straight through her. He poked and prodded, made her shift twice, and muttered to himself in a language she didn't recognize. Suppression binding, he finally announced, sitting back in his chair. Very old, very sophisticated. Someone wanted to make absolutely certain your wolf never emerged. Wren's stomach dropped. Who would do something like that? Someone with significant power and knowledge of the old magics. This isn't the work of an amateur. Aldous stroked his beard thoughtfully. The binding should have lasted your entire life. The fact that it broke at all is remarkable. But why did it break? What changed? The healer's eyes flickered to the door, where Kieran had just appeared, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. I suspect His Majesty might have something to do with that. Alpha bonds can shatter even the strongest magics, given sufficient connection. Alpha bonds. Ren felt heat creep up her neck as Kieran's gaze met hers. He didn't look surprised by the healer's words. If anything, he looked like he had already suspected as much. "Thank you, Aldous," the king said. "That will be all for now." The healer bowed and departed, leaving them alone. Kieran crossed the room and sat in the chair Aldous had vacated, close enough that Ren could smell his familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew your presence triggered my shift." "I suspected." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When I walked into that hall, I felt my wolf react to you before I even saw your face. It was like being struck by lightning. I've never experienced anything like it." "And you think that's what broke the binding?" "I think true mate bonds are more powerful than anyone realizes." His gray eyes held hers, open and honest. "I think whoever suppressed your wolf never anticipated you would find your mate before the binding ran its natural course. They didn't account for me." Ren's wolf purred at his words, pressing toward him with an eagerness that made her dizzy. She had spent so long feeling empty, and now she was overflowing with sensations and emotions she didn't know how to process. "I need to know who did this to me," she said. "Who stole 22 years of my life?" "We'll find out." Kieran reached across and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've already sent investigators to look into your mother's death, your father's marriage, everything about your past that might give us answers. Whoever did this won't escape justice." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why do you care so much? We barely know each other." He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still moving against her skin. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because when I look at you, I see myself. I see someone who was alone for too long, who built walls to survive, who stopped believing they deserved anything good." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "And I think we both deserve better than that." Tears pricked at Ren's eyes. No one had ever fought for her. No one had ever looked at her and seen someone worth saving. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "The mate bond, the wolf, any of it. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let me teach you." He rose, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. "Come to the library with me. I have something to show you." She followed him through winding corridors and up spiraling staircases until they reached a massive room filled with more books than she had ever seen. But he didn't stop at the shelves. He led her to a set of glass doors that opened onto a private balcony overlooking the mountains. "When I was young and everything felt overwhelming, I came here," Kieran said, standing beside her as the wind tugged at their hair. "I would stare at the peaks and remind myself that the world was bigger than my problems, that whatever I was facing would pass." Ren looked out at the endless expanse of stone and sky, and for the first time since her world had shattered, she felt something like peace. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So are you." He said it simply, without expectation. "And I'm going to spend as long as it takes proving that to you." Her wolf howled with joy. And Ren, standing on a balcony with the Alpha King, finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found where she belonged. 3 weeks at Shadowmere changed everything. Kieran kept his promise. Every day he taught her something new about her wolf, how to communicate with it, how to shift without pain, how to control the overwhelming flood of heightened senses. They ran together through the forests surrounding the palace, his massive black wolf loping beside her white one, and Ren discovered a freedom she had never known existed. She was happy. For the first time in her memory, she was genuinely, achingly happy. But happiness, she was learning, came with its own kind of terror. because the more time she spent with Kieran, the deeper she fell. And falling for a king who called her his mate, who looked at her like she hung the moon, who was almost certainly too good to be true, felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone would catch her. "You're brooding again." Kieran's voice pulled her from her thoughts. They were in his private study, where she had taken to spending her evenings while he worked through the endless paperwork of ruling a kingdom. He claimed her presence helped him concentrate. She suspected he just didn't like being alone. "I'm not brooding, I'm thinking." "You furrow your brow when you brood. It's adorable." He set down his quill and turned to face her fully. "What's troubling you?" Ren hesitated. The truth was complicated, tangled up in years of rejection and abandonment, and the bone-deep certainty that good things didn't happen to people like her. But Kieran had been nothing but honest with her, and she owed him the same. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of this, of us, of how much I feel when I'm with you." He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Then he rose from his desk and crossed the room to where she sat curled in an armchair by the fire. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Tell me what you feel." Her heart hammered. "I feel like I've known you my whole life. Like my wolf was always reaching for you even when I didn't know it existed. When you walk into a room, everything else fades. When you touch me, I forget how to breathe." She laughed shakily. "It's terrifying. What if I'm imagining it? What if the bond is making me feel things that aren't real?" "Do you want to know what I feel?" He didn't wait for her answer. "I feel like I spent 32 years wandering through life half asleep, and then you crashed into my world and woke me up. I feel like every moment before I met you was just waiting. I feel like if I lost you now, I would never recover." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Kieran, the bond doesn't create feelings, Ren. It recognizes them. It connects souls that were already meant to find each other." He lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "What I feel for you is real. It was real the moment I saw you, and it will be real for the rest of my life, whether you accept it or not." She kissed him. It wasn't planned. One moment she was crying, overwhelmed by his words and the aching sincerity in his eyes, and the next she was surging forward, her mouth finding his with a desperation she couldn't contain. He responded instantly. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and she gasped at the heat that flooded through her. This was nothing like the gentle touches they had shared before. This was hunger and need and years of loneliness finally finding its answer. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Kieran's forehead pressed against hers, his eyes closed, a sound rumbling from his chest that was almost a growl. "I've been trying to be patient," he said roughly, "trying to give you time to adjust, to be certain. But if you keep kissing me like that, my control is going to shatter." "Maybe I want it to shatter." His eyes flew open, blazing silver in the firelight. "Ren, I'm tired of being afraid." She gripped the front of his tunic, holding him close. "I'm tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. I love you, Kieran. I love you, and I don't want to waste another moment pretending I don't." The words hung between them, electric and irreversible. Kieran stared at her like she had offered him the world. "Say it again," he breathed. "I love you." He kissed her so thoroughly that she forgot her own name. When he finally pulled back, his smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. "I love you too," he said. "I love you, my white wolf, my mate, my everything." He pressed another kiss to her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "And I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again." Ren laughed through her tears, pulling him back down for another kiss. Outside, the moon rose over Shadowmere, and somewhere in the mountains, a wolf howled in celebration. They weren't alone anymore. Neither of them would ever be alone again. The investigators returned on a gray morning heavy with the promise of rain. Ren was in the training yard with Kieran when his captain approached, his face grim. Whatever news he carried, it wasn't good. Kieran's expression hardened as he listened to the whispered report, and when he turned to Ren, something cold had settled behind his eyes. "Come with me," he said quietly. "There's something you need to hear." They gathered in the War Council chamber. Kieran, Ren, the captain, and two investigators who looked like they hadn't slept in days. On the table between them lay a stack of documents, letters, and a small glass vial filled with something dark and viscous. "We traced the suppression binding to its source," the lead investigator began. "The magic used was old, predating the current era by several centuries. Only a handful of practitioners would have the knowledge to cast it." "Who?" Ren's voice came out steadier than she felt. The investigator exchanged a glance with his partner. "Your stepmother, Lady Helene, paid a significant sum to a witch named Morath 22 years ago. The payment was made 3 days after your birth." The room tilted. Ren gripped the edge of the table to keep from swaying. 3 days, she repeated. "She bound my wolf 3 days after I was born?" "It appears so, my lady, but there's more." The investigator pushed a stack of letters across the table. "We found these hidden in Lady Helene's private chambers, correspondence between her and the witch, spanning 2 decades. Ren picked up the first letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was elegant, precise, utterly familiar. She had seen it on household ledgers and social invitations her entire life. "The child must never shift. Her wolf is too powerful. A white wolf, the witch says, blessed by the old gods. If she comes into her power, everything we've planned will be for nothing. The binding must hold until she dies. I don't care what it costs." She knew. Ren's voice was barely a whisper. "She knew what I was, and she buried it." "That's not all." The second investigator stepped forward, his expression dark. "We investigated your mother's death as well. The official record says she died in childbirth, but we found testimony from the midwife who attended the birth. She was paid to lie. Your mother didn't die delivering you. She died 3 days later, the same day the binding was cast." The air left Ren's lungs. "The binding required a sacrifice," the investigator continued grimly. "A life freely given to seal the magic. Your stepmother didn't just suppress your wolf, my lady. She murdered your mother to do it." Ren couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room was spinning, and somewhere far away she heard Kieran calling her name, felt his hands on her shoulders, but none of it seemed real. Her mother, who she had mourned her entire life, who she had imagined died bringing her into the world, murdered, sacrificed, so that a jealous woman could steal everything that should have been hers. Why? The word tore out of her like a sob. Why would she do this? Power. Kieran's voice was cold as iron. "A white wolf would have made you the most valuable bride in the kingdom. Your father would have arranged a marriage to royalty, possibly even to my family. Lady Helene wanted that future for her own daughters. She couldn't compete with you, so she eliminated the competition." The letters confirmed it. Page after page of Helene's meticulous planning, how she had seduced Ren's grieving father, how she had married him for his title and lands, how she had slowly poisoned him against his own daughter until he saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. And then she had let him die too. "We no longer need him," one letter read. "The estate will pass to me, and the girl will be no threat to anyone. Let the old fool go." "She killed my father." Ren's hands shook so badly the letter fell from her fingers. "She killed both of them. She took everything from me. She'll answer for it." Kieran's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. She could feel the rage vibrating through him, barely contained. "I'll have her arrested within the hour. She'll face trial for murder, conspiracy, and use of forbidden magic. The penalty is death. I want to see her." The words came out hard and cold, nothing like her usual voice. I want to look her in the eye and ask her how she lived with herself, how she watched me suffer for 22 years knowing what she had done. Ren dash dash. Please. She pulled back to meet his eyes, and whatever he saw in her face made his protest die on his lips. I need this. I need to understand. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Together, then. We'll face her together. Ren's wolf rose in her chest, fierce and furious, and finally ready to confront the woman who had stolen her life. There would be a reckoning, and Helene would learn exactly how dangerous a cornered white wolf could be. They brought Helene to Shadowmere in chains. She looked smaller than Ren remembered, diminished somehow, stripped of the fine gowns and jewels that had always armored her. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating. Even now, facing execution, she showed no fear. The confrontation took place in a private chamber, away from prying eyes. Kieran stood at Ren's side, a solid wall of warmth and support, while Helene sat in a hard wooden chair with guards flanking her. So the little mouse found her claws, Helene said, her lip curling. I always knew this day might come. I just didn't think you'd have the spine to face me. You killed my mother. Ren's voice didn't waver. You murdered her to steal my wolf. I did what was necessary. Helene's tone was matter-of-fact, utterly without remorse. Your mother was weak. Beautiful, yes, but weak. She never understood what she had. A white wolf daughter, a gift from the moon goddess herself. She would have wasted you on some minor lord, let you live a quiet life in obscurity. I had bigger plans. Plans that involved sacrificing her life? The witch required payment. Your mother's life force was the only thing strong enough to fuel a binding that would last. Helene shrugged. She was going to die eventually anyway. I simply accelerated the timeline. Ren's wolf snarled, pressing against her control. She wanted to shift, to tear this woman apart with her bare teeth, but she forced herself to stay human. She needed answers more than she needed revenge. And my father? Did you ever love him at all? Something flickered in Helene's eyes, the first crack in her icy composure. Your father was a fool. A grieving fool who couldn't see past his own pain. He was so desperate for comfort that he never questioned why a beautiful young widow would suddenly take interest in him. Her voice hardened. I gave him 15 years of my life, bore him 2 daughters, managed his household. When he started asking questions about your mother's death, I did what I had to do. You poisoned him. I freed myself from a burden that had outlived its usefulness. Ren felt sick. All those years of watching her father fade, of being told it was a wasting illness, of holding his hand as he slipped away. It had all been a lie. A murder stretched out over months. There's one thing I don't understand, Kieran said, his voice cold enough to freeze fire. Why keep Ren alive at all? If she was such a threat, why not simply kill her? Helene laughed. Because dead daughters raise questions, missing daughters even more so. But a wolfless daughter? A defective, invisible, worthless creature that no one wanted? She smiled at Ren, and it was the cruelest expression she had ever seen. You were more useful alive. A servant in your own home, a reminder of your mother's failure, a cautionary tale for my daughters about what happens to weak women. The words hit Ren like physical blows. 22 years of suffering, and it had all been deliberate. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment of being made to feel worthless, Helene had orchestrated it all. You're a monster, Ren whispered. I'm a survivor. Helene's eyes blazed with sudden fury. You think I wanted this life? Married off at 16 to a man twice my age, widowed at 20 with nothing but debts and a ruined reputation? I clawed my way back from nothing. I refused to let the world crush me. And if a few people had to die along the way, so be it. I won't apologize for wanting more. You won't have to. Kieran stepped forward, his shadow falling over Helene like a death shroud. The trial is a formality. You've confessed to murder, conspiracy, and blood magic. The sentence is death. For the first time, fear flickered across Helene's face, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a sly, knowing smile that made Ren's stomach clench. "Kill me if you like," Helene said softly. "But you should know, the witch Morath doesn't work alone. She has a network, patrons in high places who paid well for her services, powerful people who won't appreciate you disrupting their arrangements." "What are you talking about? Did you really think I was the only one who wanted a white wolf suppressed?" Helene's laugh was like breaking glass. "The binding wasn't just my idea. I was approached, offered golden guidance, told exactly how to proceed. There are people in this kingdom, people very close to your precious king, who wanted your wolf buried forever." Ren turned to Kieran, but his face had gone pale. "She's lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Ask him about his uncle, Little Mouse. Ask him about Lord Aldrich Blackwood, who sits on his council even now. Ask him who first suggested that a white wolf bride might threaten the royal bloodline." The chamber fell silent. Ren looked at Kieran, searching for denial, for reassurance. But all she saw was dawning horror. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "Ren, I swear I didn't know." "But you suspected." The words came from somewhere cold and broken inside her. "When the healer mentioned the binding, when we talked about who could have done this, you went quiet. You looked away. I thought—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "My uncle made comments years ago about white wolves being dangerous, unpredictable. I thought he was just superstitious. I never imagined—" "That your own family helped destroy mine?" She saw the devastation on his face, saw how much her words wounded him, but the pain in her chest was too vast, too consuming to leave room for sympathy. Her mother was dead. Her father was dead. Her entire life had been stolen. And now she learned that the rot extended even here, to the palace, to the very council that surrounded the man she loved. "I need to go." She backed toward the door. I can't breathe." "Ren, please!" But she was already running, down corridors, up staircases, until she burst through the doors of the balcony where he had first shown her the mountains. She fell to her knees at the railing, gasping for air, her wolf howling with grief and rage and a betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. She had finally found a home, finally found love. And now she didn't know if any of it could survive the truth. She didn't hear him approach. One moment Ren was alone on the balcony, the next a hand clamped over her mouth and something sharp pressed against her throat. She tried to scream, tried to shift, but a familiar burning sensation spread through her veins. Wolfsbane, she realized with horror. Someone had coated the blade with wolfsbane. "Don't struggle." The voice was cultured, aristocratic, utterly cold. "I've waited 22 years for this moment. I won't let you ruin everything now." He dragged her backward, away from the railing, into the shadows of the library. When he finally released her mouth, she spun to face him. Lord Aldrich Blackwood looked nothing like his nephew. Where Kieran was dark and intense, his uncle was silver-haired and elegant, with the kind of face that belonged on portraits and coins. But his eyes, pale blue and empty, held nothing but calculation. "You should have stayed buried," he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "A wolfless servant, invisible and forgotten. But my nephew had to play hero, had to trigger that wretched bond. And now, here we are." "Why?" Ren's voice came out ragged, the wolfsbane burning through her system. "Why would you want to suppress a white wolf? What threat could I possibly pose to you?" "Not you, your bloodline." Aldrich circled her slowly, the wolfsbane blade glinting in the dim light. "White wolves are kingmakers, girl. The old texts are very clear. When a white wolf mates with a royal bloodline, the offspring are unstoppable. Alphas among alphas. They unite kingdoms, end wars, build empires. That sounds like a good thing? It sounds like the end of everything I've worked for. His voice sharpened. I have spent 40 years positioning myself as the power behind the throne. First with Kieran's father, then with Kieran himself. I control the council, the treasury, the military appointments. When Kieran dies without an heir, which he will eventually, the crown passes to me. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. You've been sabotaging him, keeping him from finding a mate. Every suitable candidate was quietly discouraged. Every potential match mysteriously fell through. And when I learned of a white wolf birth in a minor noble house, well, he smiled. That required more drastic measures. I couldn't risk Kieran finding you before I found you first. So you had my mother killed, my wolf bound, my entire life destroyed. I had a threat eliminated. The fact that you suffered was incidental. He stopped circling, standing directly before her. And now I'm going to finish what I started. Helene's confession has made things complicated, but dead women tell no tales, and once you're gone, the evidence dies with you. Ren's wolf thrashed against the wolfsbane suppression, desperate to break free, but the poison was too strong, too fresh. She couldn't shift, couldn't fight, could barely stand. Kieran will know, she managed. He'll find out what you've done. Kieran will find your body at the base of the mountain and assume you jumped, grief-stricken over the revelations about your family, unable to cope with the trauma. Aldrich shrugged. Tragic, really. He'll mourn for a while and then he'll move on. He always does. He raised the blade. The door exploded inward. Kieran came through in wolf form, massive, black as midnight, eyes blazing with fury that seemed to light the shadows on fire. He slammed into his uncle with the force of a battering ram, sending them both crashing into a bookshelf. Books rained down as they struggled, Aldrich shifting into his own wolf, gray and lean and fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. But Kieran was younger, stronger, fueled by a rage that transcended anything his uncle could match. Within moments, it was over. Aldrich lay pinned beneath Kieran's massive paw, his gray wolf whimpering in submission, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. Kieran shifted back, naked and heaving, his hand wrapped around his uncle's throat. Give me one reason, he snarled, one reason I shouldn't kill you where you lie. I'm your family, Aldrich gasped. Your blood. You murdered her mother. You stole her life. You tried to kill my mate. Kieran's grip tightened. You are nothing to me. Kieran. Ren's voice was weak, the wolfsbane still burning through her. Don't. He needs to face justice. The kingdom needs to see what he's done. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. The wolf in his eyes was pure predator, demanding blood, demanding vengeance. But slowly, agonizingly, he pulled back. Guards, he roared. Now! They flooded in within seconds, alerted by the noise, weapons drawn. Aldrich was dragged away in chains, his crimes already being catalogued, his fate already sealed. And then Kieran was at Ren's side, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. The wolfsbane, she whispered. He poisoned me. I know. The healers are coming. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you. You did protect me. She gripped his shoulders, forcing herself to stay conscious. You came. I will always come. His voice broke. Don't you understand that yet? There is nothing in this world, no conspiracy, no betrayal, no truth, that could make me stop fighting for you. The healers arrived, administering antidotes, checking her wounds. But through it all, Kieran never let go of her hand, and Ren, despite the poison burning through her veins, felt something in her chest begin to heal. The trial was held 3 days later. Lord Aldrich Blackwood stood before the assembled kingdom, stripped of his titles and his dignity, while witness after witness testified to his crimes. The witch Marath had been captured trying to flee the border and had confessed everything in exchange for a quick death rather than a slow one. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was never in doubt. Wren watched from the gallery as the man who had orchestrated her suffering was sentenced to death. She expected to feel satisfaction, or at least relief. Instead, she felt hollow. Justice couldn't bring back her mother, couldn't return the 22 years she had lost, couldn't undo the trauma that would mark her for the rest of her life. Kieran found her afterward, standing alone in the corridor outside the great hall. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, tension in every line of his body. He had barely slept since the attack, spending every moment either at her bedside or dealing with the fallout of his uncle's betrayal. "It's over," he said quietly. "He'll be executed at dawn. Helene, too." Wren nodded slowly. "I know I should feel something. Happy, maybe, or relieved, but I just feel empty. That's normal." He stepped closer, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. Grief doesn't follow logic. Neither does healing. "Is that why you've been avoiding me?" He flinched. "I haven't been—" "You have." She turned to face him fully, and he looked away. "Ever since the attack, you've been distant, careful, like you're afraid I'll break if you get too close. I'm afraid you'll leave." The words came out raw, broken. "I'm afraid that every time you look at me, you see my family's betrayal. I'm afraid that loving me has cost you too much already." Wren's heart cracked. She reached out and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Your uncle's sins are not your sins," she said firmly. "You didn't know, and even if you had suspected, you were a child when this started, a boy trying to survive in a court full of wolves." She smiled sadly. "Sound familiar?" Something broke in his expression. "Wren, I love you. That hasn't changed. If anything, watching you fight for me, watching you choose me over your own blood." Her voice caught. "I've never felt more certain of anything in my life." He kissed her. It was desperate and fierce and tasted of salt. His tears or hers, she couldn't tell. When he pulled back, he was shaking. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them. "What?" "Marry me." He dropped to one knee, right there in the corridor where anyone might see, and pulled a ring from his pocket. It was silver, set with a white moonstone that glowed like captured starlight. "I was going to wait. I had plans. A dinner, music, the balcony at sunset. But I can't wait anymore. I can't spend another moment not knowing if you'll be mine." Kieran dash dash. "I know it's too soon. I know you've been through hell and you need time to heal. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. That whatever comes next, I want to face it together." His gray eyes blazed up at her. "You spent 22 years being told you weren't enough. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're everything." Wren stared at him, this powerful king, kneeling before her in a public corridor, offering her his heart without reservation. She thought about everything she had lost, everything she had survived, everything she had found in the ruins of her old life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, you impossible man." She laughed through her tears. "I'll marry you." He surged to his feet, sliding the ring onto her finger before sweeping her into his arms. The kiss he gave her was thorough and claiming and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, they had an audience. Servants and nobles had gathered at both ends of the corridor, drawn by the commotion. For a moment, Wren tensed, waiting for judgment. Then someone started to clap. The applause spread like wildfire, accompanied by cheers and whistles, and more than a few happy tears. Kieran tucked Ren against his side and raised their joined hands, the moonstone ring catching the light. "My mate," he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. "My queen." The crowd roared its approval, and Wren, surrounded by witnesses to her joy for the first time in her life, finally let herself believe that she deserved this. All of this. Every bit of it. 1 year later, Wren stood before the mirror in the Queen's chambers and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her wedding gown was white as her wolf, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like captured moonbeams. A crown of winter roses rested on her hair, a gift from Kieran, who had spent weeks personally selecting each bloom. The moonstone ring glinted on her finger, a constant reminder of the man waiting for her in the great hall below. "You look like a queen," Della said softly, adjusting the train of the gown. This time, Wren believed her. The wedding was the grandest the kingdom had seen in a generation. Every noble house had sent representatives. Every province had contributed to the celebrations. The girl who had been mocked for having no wolf was marrying the Alpha King, and the entire realm had turned out to witness it. Kieran stood at the altar as she walked down the aisle, and the look on his face made her heart stutter. He gazed at her like she was a miracle, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, she felt tears prick at her eyes. "My white wolf," he murmured, for her ears alone. "My everything." "My shadow," she whispered back. "My home." The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were traditional, words spoken by countless couples before them. But when Kieran promised to love and protect her until his last breath, she knew he meant every syllable. And when she promised the same, she felt her wolf howl with joy. The celebration lasted 3 days. There was feasting and dancing and more wine than Wren had ever seen. Margot and her stepsisters had not been invited. They had fled to the southern provinces after their mother's execution, and no one had heard from them since. Wren found she didn't care. They belonged to a past she had finally laid to rest. On the third night, after the guests had departed and the palace had grown quiet, Kieran found her on their balcony, the balcony where he had first shown her the mountains, where his uncle had tried to kill her, where so much of their story had unfolded. "You're thinking again," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Good thoughts this time." She leaned back against his chest, watching the moon rise over the peaks. "I was thinking about how different everything is. A year ago, I didn't even have a wolf. Now I have a kingdom." "You have more than that." His hand slid down to rest on her stomach, gentle and reverent. "When were you going to tell me?" Her breath caught. "How did you know?" "Your wolf has been insufferably smug for weeks, and you've been avoiding the wine at dinner." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I didn't want to say anything until you were ready." Tears spilled down her cheeks, happy tears, the kind she had never known she could cry. "I found out 3 days ago. I wanted to wait until after the wedding, until everything was settled." "And now?" She turned in his arms, taking his face in her hands. "Now I want to tell you that we're going to have a baby, a pup of our own." She laughed through her tears. "The healers say it will be a girl, a white wolf, like her mother." The sound Kieran made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He dropped to his knees, this king who had knelt before her twice now, and pressed his forehead to her stomach. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise you, I will spend my entire life making sure you know how loved you are, how wanted, how precious." Wren ran her fingers through his dark hair, her heart so full it ached. She had been mocked for having no wolf, treated as broken, defective, worthless. She had spent 22 years believing she would never be enough. But the Alpha King had seen the truth in her, had triggered her first shift with nothing more than the pull of their souls recognizing each other. had fought for her, bled for her, knelt for her before the entire kingdom. And now, standing beneath the moon with her mate and her daughter-to-be, Wren finally understood. She had never been broken. She had simply been waiting for her wolf, for her king, for the life she was always meant to live. And it was more beautiful than she ever could have imagined.